Hey team, and welcome to another video in the Astrological Magical Elections video series. Today we're going to talk about those magical electional opportunities that are going to be available to us between our Leo New Moon on the 8th of August until our Aquarius Full Moon Part 2 on the 22nd of August. And fun fact, this upcoming second Aquarius Full Moon actually fits the original definition of a blue moon, which is the third full moon in a season that will contain 4 full moons. So that's kind of a fun thing. So after our small break from the first Aquarius full moon, where we didn't have magical opportunities to really talk about, we have a few, just kind of a small handful to discuss in today's video. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the North American continent. So our first electional opportunity for the North American continent is going to be on August 10th at around 2:45 p.m. And this is going to be for a 13th Lunar Mansion talisman. Now the 13th Lunar Mansion is one that is primarily utilized for creating or strengthening relationships. The 13th Lunar Mansion's energies are much more attuned to the erotic sexual side, as opposed to, say, the 6th Lunar Mansion, which is much more about like the romantic courtly side of it. So nothing wrong with either of those things, just trying to stress the difference to make you aware of like what the different talismans are doing, like what they can do. So the 13th Lunar Mansion is useful for strengthening or repairing relationships, more long-lasting relationships, or relationships that have been around for a long time, and maybe having difficulties with like sexual compatibility. The 13th Lunar Mansion is very good for. Even on a more personal level, the 13th Lunar Mansion is useful for overcoming sexual dysfunctions, particularly male sexual dysfunctions, but it can also handle females. It's just not specifically fine-tuned for that. For that, we would look to the 19th Lunar Mansion, more specifically for gynecological issues. But the 13th Lunar Mansion can help us out there should the 19th prove unavailable. So taking a look at our election chart, we have the moon placed here in the 10th house in the 13th Lunar Mansion, applying to the conjunction of Venus, which is of course very important for relationship type talismans because Venus rules that, for sexual type talismans because Venus rules sex, and even for like the healing aspect of the 13th Lunar Mansion, if you choose to use it for addressing some sort of sexual dysfunction. Hit my microphone. Venus is also very good for that because she's a benefic planet that wants to heal and is capable of healing. So that's really good. We've got some good similitude there. The ruler of the first house is Mars because Scorpio rises, and here we have Mars very angular in Virgo in the 10th house, unafflicted by Saturn, not combust the sun. So all in all, just a pretty good, pretty nice, pretty solid talismanic election. In previous versions of this, we were able to kind of utilize the Mars-Venus conjunction, with Venus ruling the 7th house. We don't really have that here. They're kind of too far away. So that's the more, we kind of lose that fun part that we had. So one thing to be very careful about, especially those who are in the mountain and the Pacific time zones, is that the moon is actually very, very close to the end of the 13th Lunar Mansion. So as you can see, she's at 16 Virgo and 7 minutes, and the 13th Lunar Mansion ends at 17 Virgo and 8 minutes. So in about like half an hour of clock time, the moon will have moved about out of this mansion. So be careful if you're going to try to utilize this mansion in, like I said, the mountain and the Pacific time zones. Make sure that she is not past 17 degrees Virgo in 8 minutes. And if you need to, you should be able to use this with the moon in the 11th house, not necessarily in the 10th house. Like if you were to pull up this chart for your location and see that the moon's already past 17 degrees in 8 minutes because of time zone differences, then you can probably get away with having the moon in the 11th house to give you a little bit more time, as long as you don't have, as long as you don't have a situation to where, as long as you don't have a situation to where the ruler of the first house is in the 12th house, you'll be fine. So if you need to kind of recalibrate this chart because you want to use it and you would like to get it to where the moon is not past the 13th Lunar Mansion to the 14th, which is not good, then you would want to make sure that at the very least, if you're going to use the Libra ascendant, make sure that Venus is not in the 12th house when you do that, which of course your house system that you utilize will play a big part of that, because there's no way that you can get Libra on the ascendant with Venus and Virgo not in the 12th house if you're using like a whole sign house system, and even with an equal house sign system, that might be a little more difficult. But with quadrant house systems, we can pull it off pretty easily. But using a Scorpio ascendant if you can use like an early Scorpio ascendant, you reach a new problem. We'll say, to where if you were to utilize an early Scorpio ascendant, then you run the risk of the ascendant being square Saturn here. You run the risk of the ascendant being square Saturn, which is not good. So you'll have to kind of play with it. Just have fun with it. It's fine. But those are some things that you can do or to watch out for if you need to push the chart around to keep Moon in the 13th Lunar Mansion. So our next electional opportunity is going to be for August 15th at around 5 in the morning. And this is going to be an opportunity for an 18th Lunar Mansion talisman. The 18th Lunar Mansion is one that is primarily about healing, more useful for people who are already currently sick with something and need it to be gone. The 18th Lunar Mansion is better equipped for that than, say, preventative medicine. And this one we're going to put like a question mark besides, because I really wanted to utilize the 18th Lunar Mansion this go around, because while the moon is in the 18th Lunar Mansion, she's also applying a square to the sun. And while squares are of course not ideal, we would prefer easier applications. Squares are still a connection. They're still a good aspect. So I would like to use it as we can. So putting the moon in the 18th Lunar Mansion, having her apply to the sun is really great. Then I kind of have to figure out how to make it work because there were issues putting her on the angles. So I went with a fourth house position moon, which is not super ideal in many ways, but it's the best we have sometimes. And with this, I also wanted to make sure that we had the sextile with Venus, between the Venus and the ascendant, to help us kind of reinforce the healing and recuperative aspects and just kind of stabilize the election. So we wanted to reinforce the healing and recuperative aspects of the talisman itself and stabilize the election by putting the ascendant in contact with a benefic planet. The ruler of the first house in this chart is the moon, who is fine. We're dodging this square with Saturn, which is down here like about 10 degrees away, not afflicted by Mars. All in all, it's kind of fine. It's like a fine is kind of how I would describe it. Not like good or great, it's fine. But we have this kind of like really difficult situation to deal with Saturn in Aquarius and Mars in Virgo, to where their squares and oppositions are of course kind of canceling out a lot of signs, and then with Jupiter and Saturn both being retrograde and kind of making it unable to utilize Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, or Sagittarius ascendants, things get more complicated. So this is kind of how we work around it. We kind of put the moon in different places to see what we can work with. And while typically you would prefer houses on this side of the chart because there's an upward motion implied with them, like planets are rising up on this half and then they're setting down in this half. So the moon here in the fourth house is not super ideal because of that. You would really prefer her in the 1st, the 10th, the 11th, and even the 3rd. The 4th is an angular house, so there is some strength to it, but it's just kind of because it's on this downward swing side of the chart, it's less of an ideal position. And really kind of like the best places over here are the 9th and the 5th on this side of the chart. But, I wanted to trade out I could have done a 5th house moon, but I wanted to trade that out for the sextile with Venus to the ascendant, and these are just the things that we have to do sometimes. So our next electional opportunity that we need to talk about is just a few hours later, August 15th at around 7 in the morning, and this is for a Sun in Leo talisman, maybe? And the reason why I put the maybe is because I just don't think it's a very great electional chart for it, but I know that it's going to get talked about and it's going to get posted on social media, so we have to talk about it. For the people who post magical stuff on social media. And a lot of the boxes are checked for this election, so it's hard for me to be like, oh, this is a bad election, when it literally like hits all the criteria that I normally look for. So we've got the Sun in Leo on the ascendant, check. It's Sun's day, Sun's hour, check. The moon is applying a square to the sun, which is fine, check. And the sun is not really afflicted by Mars or Saturn. The sun can't be combust, the sun can't be retrograde, stuff like that. Now, what I don't particularly like about this election is that you have Mars here in the 1st house, and that pretty much always brings like damage to the person in some form, so I prefer to like not have that. So I'm not a big fan of this election, but I know that This will change depending on house systems, but I feel like a first house quadrant Mars is pretty impactful. So I'm not a big fan of it, but sometimes you just need a dash of solar power, so I get it. But just something to watch out for on that. So our next and our final election opportunity for the North American continent is going to be for August 18th at around 10:30 at night, 10:27, and this is going to be an opportunity for a 22nd Lunar Mansion talisman. And the 22nd Lunar Mansion is actually a really neat one that I don't really have the opportunity to talk about as much as I would like to. But the main focus of the 22nd Mansion is for escape, to help people escape or to flee from things. And just knowing that it's for that gives you a lot of options of how you can use it. You can use it to, escape a stressful job. You can use it to escape a hostile environment. You can use it to escape an illness. Healing is one of the main functions of this mansion for those who are already sick. It's kind of how you would want to use it as opposed to somebody who is wanting something more for preventative medicine. So the 22nd and the 18th kind of share a little bit of a healing modality there. But the 22nd mansion has a lot of good flexibility to it, which is kind of fitting for a talisman for a mansion that is very obviously Mercury inspired. So in our election here, we have the moon placed in the 22nd Lunar Mansion. At the very, very end of it, the moon will leave the 22nd mansion at 12 degrees Capricorn in 51 minutes. So very, very imminent. At the same time, the moon is applying this trine to Mars, who rules the first house. And we want to be kind of careful with this election because if we were to do this any earlier, we would have kind of a weird frustration kind of thing happening with the aspects, which would kind of corrupt the talisman. So let's kind of look through that. So if we were to go back in time 1 minute, you can see down here that Mercury and Mars have switched places. Mercury's on the left and Mars is now on the right. So what this means is that prior to this, the moon was applying a trine to Mercury. But before the moon can reach it, Mercury actually completes a trine to Mars and swaps places. So now the moon, who thought she was applying to Mercury, now is applying to Mars. That's not good. Like that, we don't want that sort of aspect connection in our election. Because basically the thing that we want, the thing that we're trying to get, the thing that we're trying to use the talisman for, slips through our fingers essentially. So we need to be careful and be aware of how exactly the moon's aspects are going to play out when we're planning election talismans. Make sure that the moon is actually going to apply to the planet that aspect is going to perfect before she moves on to another one or somebody else gets in her way, because that usually means that the target of the talisman, the purpose of the talisman, the goal of the talisman misses. And that can be good and that can be bad. It's usually bad because that thing that you wanted, you made the talisman for a reason and you've lost that opportunity for that thing. But, the replacement might be just as good. Whatever the talisman is able to dig up might be just as good or better than what you thought you initially wanted. So it's kind of a little bit of a gamble on that. But in this instance, going from anticipating a trine to Mercury in Virgo to actually getting a trine of Mars in Virgo does not sound like an upgrade. So it's easier to just sort of like consciously or intentionally lean into the Mars and Virgo trine by waiting a little bit than it is to try to get the Mercury and Virgo trine and then end up with the Mars and Virgo trine as a consolation prize, because there's no way you're going to avoid it. So moving on to the Australian continent and their electional opportunities, their first election is going to be on August 13th at 1:15 in the morning, and this is going to be an opportunity for a 15th Lunar Mansion talisman. So the 15th Lunar Mansion is one that is primarily utilized for the accumulation of wealth, for the development of friendships, and tends to focus more on like professional networking kind of friendships or connections. So not really that, we'll say, deeper, intimate, emotional kind of friendships, but just kind of like people involved in the same thing as you are. So taking a look at our election chart, which is a little bit different from our more standard talismanic elections, we have the moon placed here in the 5th house, which is a fortunate house, but again on this kind of less ideal declining side of the chart. And at the same time, she's applying the sextile to the sun, which is why I went through this whole mess of trying to make this election work. And while that's happening, we have Venus as the ruler of the 1st house in the 4th house and applying this trine to the degree of the ascendant. So I wanted to kind of keep that benefic stabilization to help make the election better. Because if we're not going to have the moon on one of the angles, which is fine, then we need to have a benefic aspect the ascendant. That's sort of the trade. If we can't have A, then we need B. So if we can't get the moon on the ascendant or the midheaven, then we can have the moon in a different house that is not a dark house, so not the 8th, 12th, 2nd, or 6th. But then we need to have a benefic planet aspecting the ascendant. So those are kind of our two options. And here we've more option B. Either way, we can get functional talismanic collections from it. Just one is a bit easier to do. Another one requires some finagling and is not always useful. Unfortunately, that 15th Lunar Mansion talisman is really the only electional opportunity for the Australian continent for this next 2 weeks. But I did want to kind of take a look at that Sun in Leo talisman for Australia to kind of talk about it and why it may or may not be a good decision to use. So here is that election for Australia for that Sun in Leo talisman, and it's at August 15th at around 7:15 in the morning. So we've got the Sun on the ascendant in Leo. It's the Sun's day and the Sun's hour, and the Moon is applying this square to the Sun from about 10 degrees out, which is kind of wide, or may sound kind of wide, but actually for the Sun and Moon that's fine. They have pretty large orbs. Our problems for this chart are, one is it's kind of the same issue that we had for the North American version, which is Mars here in the first house. Of course, the house system that you utilize will change your point of view on that. Whole sign houses, for instance, will have Mars in the second house, but it's just kind of hard to unsee Mars in the first quadrant like that. And then the other thing you have to kind of think about is, while you've got this square to the Sun upcoming, the Moon is just recently separating from the square of Saturn, like 3 degrees out. Which is kind of rough. So something to kind of think about with that is how much you want to bring in this more Saturnian influence, which the North American version didn't really have to worry about because the Moon was much further along. It was like at 20 or 21 degrees Scorpio, so it had kind of left the Sun, it kind of left the square of Saturn further in the dust to not worry about. An alternative chart would be the Sun on the midheaven like this. It's still the Sun's day. The Sun is in the midheaven in Leo, which is good. You no longer have anything in the first house. Mars and Saturn aren't damaging it, but our issue is that Jupiter is retrograde, and having a retrograde planet as a ruler of the first house is a big no-no. So I don't really recommend doing that, especially for something like a Sun talisman, which will be more potentially or hopefully more long-lived. And I think this is going to be like I think this is like our one opportunity where everything kind of aligned right for there to be a potential Sun in Leo talisman. So I don't think they're good ones this year. So I don't really recommend them this year, which is a little unfortunate because I don't think we had good choices for them last year either. But I might be confused about that. It just seems like, and this is kind of going to be a thing, like it's not really a surprise, I guess. But it's just going to be an issue as long as Saturn is in Aquarius, because part of the problem was that up until like the Sun makes it to about 18 degrees or so of Aquarius, it's in this opposition with Saturn, so it makes it difficult to separate the two out. So I guess it's just kind of our lot in life to where we have kind of 5 years of difficult Sun talisman maneuvering, to where when Saturn was in the Capricorn, we had to deal with the square between it and the Sun in Aries, so we couldn't really do Sun and Aries talismans without bending over backwards really to make them work. Kind of the same thing here. Now the Sun is we're gonna have to do a lot more to be more careful, have a lot slimmer options when it comes to Sun in Leo because of the opposition with Saturn in Aquarius. So leaving Australia behind, moving into our Western European chart options, our first one's going to be for August 9th at around 2:50 in the afternoon, and this is potentially an opportunity for a Regulus fixed star talisman. Regulus, of course, the heart of the lion, and a talisman that is used primarily for courage, bravery, countering anxiety, fears, depressions, obtaining glory, obtaining wealth, just really good star stuff. I mean, one of the really more positive fixed stars, helping to, of course, elevate one's social status, things like that. So this chart is a little bit more tenuous in some ways, but we're just going to take it piece by piece. So we need the Moon to be applying to the star Regulus while Regulus is on the ascendant or the midheaven, and we have that here. The Moon at 28 degrees is applying immediately to 0 degrees Virgo, while 0 degrees Virgo is on the midheaven, which is good. At the same time, we want the Moon to be applying to a planet that is of the nature of the star. So Regulus is of the star of Jupiter and Mars. Regulus is of the nature of Jupiter and Mars, right? Of the planets Jupiter and Mars. Um, and here we have the moon also applying a conjunction with Mars. Typically, conjunctions with Mars are more damaging to the moon, but when Mars is the thing that we're looking for, one of the things that we want, then we don't worry so much about it, especially since Mars rules the ascendant, so Mars represents more the person who this talisman is for. Our issue, our thing here is that Saturn is maybe squaring the ascendant depending on how much of an orb you typically give aspects between the ascendant and planets. So that's something to keep aware of, that this, and there's not really a whole lot of wiggle room, because the MC needs to be around 0 degrees Virgo, as close as we can. So we don't have a whole lot of room to keep pushing the ascendant backwards through Scorpio, because we'll get further and further into Virgo as well. So that's kind of the thing. So really the question is, to you, is 6 degrees far enough away for a square of Saturn and the ascendant? If it is far enough away, then this could be a really great Regulus talisman for you. If you don't think that's far enough, then maybe wait until next time. Our first election opportunity is going to be for August 15th at around 2:45, and this is going to be an option for a 19th Lunar Mansion talisman. The 19th Lunar Mansion is one that is primarily utilized for spiritual protection and shielding, warding and banishing, but also useful for helping with gynecological issues, for protection during pregnancy and for childbirth. The moon is here in the 19th Lunar Mansion on the ascendant. She's not afflicted by the square of Saturn, not afflicted by Mars, and she's applying the square to the sun. Squares, of course, are not the ideal aspect. They're like on the lower end of the rung, but they're a connection that can facilitate things. So we're going to use it when we have that option. We would prefer sextiles and trines, but this is kind of like the don't look at gift horse in the mouth kind of a situation. The ruler of the first house is Mars, who is in the 10th house, pretty angular and capable, unafflicted by Saturn, not combust, doing okay. Towards the end of its cycle, but doing okay. So all in all, this one is it's pretty standard, pretty strong for a 19th Lunar Mansion talisman. I would recommend it. But just about an hour earlier from that election, we have another election to talk about, and that is the potential for an opportunity for a Sun in Leo talisman that we want to talk about. I don't think it's a good election at all, but I want to talk about it because I think it'll be something that is brought up. So I just kind of want to point out to you some of the problems with it, to get you thinking about critically analyzing election charts for things that you see online. So looking at our election, initially it starts off fine. We have the Sun in Leo in the 10th house on the midheaven. It's the Sun's day. That's fine. The moon is applying the square to the Sun, which is great. But to get the Sun on the ascendant, we have to deal with this almost like right on square between Saturn and the ascendant. And that's a no. That's an immediate no. So Sun on the midheaven in a Western Europe chart for the Sun in Leo is not going to be a viable option. Now, the sunrise version of this might be harder to argue about. This one might actually be passable. Because while we have the Sun on the ascendant here, it's the Sun's day and Sun's hour, the moon's applying the square to the Sun. We don't have that problem with the Saturn square, either from the moon or to the ascendant, the opposition. This square between the moon and the Saturn is pretty well separated. And even my concern about Mars in the first house is harder to argue here, because I would probably honestly read this as a second house Mars because of how close to the cusp it is, whereas with the Australian and the North American charts, it was further into the first house, where I would have a harder time arguing it as a second house planet. So this one might be the only one that I would feel comfortable with. Because even with Mars in the second, you have Venus in the second, kind of balancing out any sort of repercussions that might happen for that. So this one might be okay, but the Sun on the midheaven one is not good. All right, so thank you guys so much for watching. Those were all of the election opportunities that I had to share with you guys today. Kind of a little bit going on, definitely better than the nothing that we had in the previous lunation, in that first Aquarius full moon, where we didn't really have anything happening for us. Hopefully things start to kind of improve more. A lot of it is just depending on Jupiter and Saturn turning direct and having access to Capricorn, Aquarius, Sagittarius, and Pisces as ascendant signs again. That would be great. and now we're going to kind of move into the part of the year where, you know, we were leaving behind the sun in Leo, where we maybe have like one electional opportunity around the entire world that works out fine. Mercury in Virgo is now a thing. And while initially we have to deal with juggling Mercury's conjunction with Mars and how damaging that is to the planet, we might be able to see some electional opportunities a little bit later come out, which will be great. And then Venus will be moving into Libra very shortly. So that will be another, hopefully there will be a couple of opportunities to pick up some talismanic elections there. So we'll keep an eye out, and I'll, of course, let you know. So everybody take care, and I'll see you guys again on our Aquarius Full Moon.